Gather around, Skull brothers and sisters. This is Skull World, brought to you by Minnesota Sports Talk. I'm your host, Dave. You can follow me on Twitter, TikTok, and Facebook at Skull World. I got a treat for you. Pull them straight out of Twitter from Zone Coverage, Matt Freeze. Matt, introduce yourself. Tell me where we can find you, all those places.
Yeah, so mostly online. My presence is on Twitter at Fries Football. As you mentioned, I write for Zone Coverage. I usually have an article every week. And they tend to be a bit longer for them. Like during the season, I tend to do film review and that sort of thing. In the off season, it's been more think pieces so far, but I'll definitely have scouting reports of the guys the Vikings draft after the draft. Maybe get into a little quarterbacks before the draft. I don't know. I haven't really kind of planned out what I'm going to do yet. And you can also find me at the Kindred Skulls podcast with my co-hosts, Nick Olson and Greg Blake. We cover, every week during the season is what we try to do. We've been a little light on the episodes recently. It's been really a difficult couple of months just to get us all together with the schedules, but we're trying to put out more content, especially as we lead up to the draft here and around free agency.
Now, if you're listening, a long time listener of mine, make sure you go to Kindred Skulls on YouTube, or where does you find that?
Yeah, it's on YouTube. It's on Twitter. We upload it to all the podcast platforms, right?
So make sure you go subscribe to
RSS
that,
feed that it goes out to.
And hopefully we get you on again sometime, maybe at a live show, and then you get a little more traffic towards your site. You help out as much as we can. I love more Vikings content on YouTube, not less. So now, little teaser. We're probably going to talk about the thumbnail that's going to be in front of this show, where Kirk Cousins apparently moving to Atlanta. But before we do, I want to talk about you are a big positive presence on Twitter. I feel and you put out content, and you give your opinion, and it's not to push a narrative at all. In my opinion, a lot of that has to do with like film study. Tell me about what you do there.
Yeah, so I mean, I like to think I try to be pretty unbiased. Obviously, I'm a Vikings fan, so I'm going to cape for Vikings guys a little bit more, but that's kind of what we want on this podcast here, right? And I do have, some preconceived notions, I'd say, that I might get dug into a little bit, but I try to keep a relatively open mind to it, right? And really, for me, it comes from the film first, right? So, it's hard, right? There's some stuff that goes into this where you can't just necessarily turn on the all 22. And I don't want to mean to like gatekeeper or anything here and know what you're seeing immediately, right? But like there are things that you can glean from that you see on a consistent basis that you just don't get with like PFF or something like that. Like there's context to a thing like Danielle Hunter's pressure rate that you can see on the film and understand that the amount of time he's pressuring the quarterbacks in under 2.5 seconds may not be as valid of a metric as some of the analytics folks might make it out to be, right? And there's multiple layers to that, right? So it's the Vikings blitzed a lot, so quarterbacks were getting the ball out quickly, and then also in those blitzes, like they're designed to get specific players home, and a lot of times that was a guy like Ivan Pace or Josh Metellus, and not necessarily Danielle Hunter. So it's like, should we really be evaluating reps where he's a decoy or the quarterback got the ball out with a one-step drop the same as the other way? So I think the film really helps with that sort of context. And I kind of went off the rails with that there, but that's just an example of where like using film study is probably pretty valuable in the context of evaluating players.
All you were doing right there is adding value, man. All follow-up questions haven't been answered, but since we're talking about Danielle Hunter, hot topic, there is people who would say that one of the things about moving on from Kirk would be the fact that there's smoke about going after Danielle Hunter. I think they're out going after all, Justin Jefferson extension, Kirk Cousins, and Danielle Hunter all at the same time. But what does Danielle Hunter mean to that defense?
I mean, I think first and foremost, he was our only valid pass rusher last year, right? Like he's the only guy who could win one-on-one against opposing offensive linemen. I did think DJ Wanham had a couple flashes when healthy, and right. I thought Marcus Davenport in the like 2 games where he was healthy actually was really, really good. But when Wanham got hurt for the rest of the year and Davenport basically didn't play, right, because of injury, that's not really saying much on the defensive side of the ball, right? Like we didn't have a guy who could win one-on-one as a pass rusher. And I think that's absolutely critical for the Vikings defense. So if we lose Danielle Hunter, all of a sudden we need two pass rushers, in my opinion. I really think in the NFL you need two pass rushers to be successful, and whether that's two edge rushers like Danielle Hunter and somebody else, an edge rusher and an interior player. Like we could add a guy in free agency or the draft. I know there was a lot of smoke if the Vikings don't take a quarterback about taking somebody like a Byron Murphy in the draft, right? Um,
Mhm.
Adding that kind of presence, I think, is really critical, and it starts with getting one guy, and Daniil's the guy we know, and I think he's really, really good still. He's also a dominant run force, and he played over 1,000 snaps for this defense. I think that's a little bit understated, where that volume of snaps is really difficult for a defensive player to take on. You look at some of the other high level free agents, and they're playing like 60% of the snaps in an edge rush rotation. And I think that's valuable when you have the guys to do that. But to have a guy who's as sturdy as Daniel is, where you don't have to be playing guys who are of a lesser caliber on a consistent basis, has value as well.
So you're talking about edge rushers. Well, those are three names that you mentioned there, and all three may not be Vikings this next year because
Right.
all three are free agents. Um, I would think out of those three guys, the one that would make the most difference and make up for the loss of the other two would be Daniil Hunter. Like if we brought back, let's say Davenport and Wanham, I would rather have Daniil Hunter than bringing those two guys back. I feel
Oh,
like
for sure. But the
his
question
his
becomes, is
go
it
ahead.
$20 million a year for Daniil Hunter versus, a combined maybe $10 million a year for those other two? So that would be kind of the trade off there. I've been for paying Daniil Hunter on a long term contract since before free agency last year. Like, I think one of my first pieces for zone coverage was that the Vikings should sign Daniil Hunter to a long term deal. So I've been all about that the entire time.
And I feel like we may have missed our opportunities. Like for instance, Kirk Cousins. We're trying to extend him. Well, we could have last year, cheaper probably because we had control. And then Daniil Hunter, we had the opportunity, but I think with Daniil though, he knew where his value could possibly be at the end of this year. And it probably made sense for him to just, hey, I'll give me that 1 year prove it deal. I'm going to play healthy and I'm going to kick ass. And sure enough, it worked out for him. And he's probably looking at a big payday. Um,
Yeah.
where I think he's going into free agency. I think it's going to be a little longer drawn out. What is your sense of that? Do you feel like that would be what he's going to do is take it into all the way into free agency and try to get his best value?
Yeah, I don't know. I think one of the things we'll learn here over the next couple weeks is whether the Vikings, or really next week, right? Because free agency starts like next Wednesday, um, is whether the Vikings are willing to offer enough to either Kirk or Daniil to entice them to come back, right? And
Mhm.
they had opportunities at the combine their agents had opportunities to kind of meet with other teams and tamper, or allegedly tamper or whatever. Maybe we don't want to accuse teams of actually doing that, but we know that these players learn their market value in those situations, right? So if the Vikings aren't offering what's market value for Daniil, and I think we upgraded him to like $20 million for last year's salary, right? Which,
Mhm.
if that's what he was wanting for a long-term deal and we weren't willing to go that, well, that price definitely increased. I think PFF had him at $21 million, and I think Brad Spielberger does a pretty good job of that. But I could see it going up to $25 million. I mean, if you look at this deal Mike Evans got, right, who is a very good wide receiver, but an older player with some of those age concerns, he got 2 years, $52 million. That's $26 million a year. And I think the pay range for edge rushers is comparable. So it wouldn't shock me at all if Daniil got up into that range. And I don't think the Vikings are probably, they're value hunting, right? They want to consistently value hunt under Kwesi, and I don't know if that's going to fit into that strategy. Uh, and if he hits free agency, it's a big concern for me, because it's with the way the cap hits work with the void years, like it's going to be hard to bring him back just because of the lack of cap relief we'll get.
Do you think that may hurt us with the, like you said, finding value, finding the deal? Davenport 1 year 13 million wasn't a bad deal. It was 1 year. There's not a lot of risk in that, even though some of the money went into void years so we
Yeah.
could stay under the cap. Those short deals, trying to find that diamond in the rough for one season. When you have a sure thing like Daniil Hunter.
I think it's absolutely worth locking the Shore thing up, and I really hope the Vikings do. I'm not going to say that ship has sailed, right? Like, and I think obviously we're going to know pretty soon. But the thing is, like, we locked up TJ Hawkinson, right? We identified a piece that we wanted to be a long-term piece of this football team. We traded assets for that, and we signed him to a long-term deal that was, quote unquote, the highest paid tight end contract. Obviously, it wasn't really the highest paid tight end contract if you look at like the context that contracts are signed in. But like at the end of the day, I think that Hawkinson provides an example where the organization found a player that they valued highly, went out, acquired him, spent a lot to do that, and paid him. So I think they can do that for Daniil Hunter if they view him as that type of player.
Right, and he was back up against the wall of free agency, so that's and like Justin Jefferson last year still had a year left, and
Yep.
had 2 years left actually. Now with Daniil Hunter, I think it was more, hey, he really needs to find out his value because he has been giving us team friendly deals for the past few years. Now back to Davenport, we extended him his to the void date to match up with like Kirk Cousins. It
Mhm.
almost seems like he's a backup plan if Daniil Hunter gets out of hand. Does it kind of feel that way? Like they want to be at flexibility? Because if we really didn't want him, we would have let him go.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's one of those things where we want him to see what his market is as well and try to get him back at a low cost. And I don't even know if it's dependent on Daniil Hunter, honestly, because if you're paying him less than something like $5 million, you
Yeah,
actually save
you're right.
money against the cap this year again. And I don't think his market's going to be that robust after another year of injury, right? Like, and the Vikings, I think, are the best position to kind of understand where he's at in the recovery process from that injury and what his prognosis looks like moving forward. So if they're willing to pay him some sort of money to come back, I would feel pretty good. I mean, as good as you can for a guy who's missed as much time as he has, but I don't think we're paying him a lot is the flip side of that, right? So it's kind of a gamble that he'll stay healthy. I wouldn't expect him to stay healthy necessarily, but I think there's a pretty high upside if he does stay healthy, given that he played well for like the 2 weeks he was actually here, right?
For sure. Just don't put him in front of my camera because he doesn't interview all that well, and I don't think Viking fans were really digging it too much. He was a little, aloof, let's just say.
Yeah.
But yeah, he on the field he looked like a monster. He was so big, bigger and faster than most people expected. Better, like Daniil, good against the run in the pass rush. So it almost would be nice if we can bring him back. Because and you did make a good point based on the cap hit of 6 million. I think we might hit $6 million if you bring him back for less. It's only going to be a cap hit, like a dead cap of like 1 million to 2 million or something like that.
Mhm.
So you can bring him back at a 3, 4, $5 million and save money on this year's cap. Speaking of saving money, Alexander Madison is going to be released if he hasn't, I don't think you have to wait till the league year or something like
Yeah.
that. So he's probably going to be gone. And it sounds like that second year wasn't guaranteed and that we can save like $3.3 million. Now I saw you do video on like Ty Chandler. Did you also do a video on Alexander Madison this regular season?
Yeah, so like I was probably one of the biggest Alex Madison defenders on Twitter, and
Yes, you were.
my
And
my my
I don't know if you
defense.
remember me commenting
Oh
every once
yeah.
in a while, but I
My
did.
my defense for Alex Madison was more of a dislike of Ty Chandler, honestly, and I just don't think his game is consistent enough to be a starting running back. I did think Madison was consistent, and I thought he ran hard, but obviously, I don't think the value he was providing was worth the like almost $4 million or whatever we actually saved in cap space by cutting him, right? Like he was a decent rotational player, but he doesn't offer the explosiveness that you look for from a running back, right? And I thought he had solid vision and was a good pass protector. But again, like it just wasn't doing the job for us. So I'd rather us try to look into free agency, which is a pretty decent crop of free agent running
Mhm.
backs, and honestly, maybe make a little bit of an investment there. That's like what I would prefer the Vikings to do. And I'm pretty anti paying running backs in general as part of the thing. But I think that they can find more value in a better player in free agency this year by spending a little bit of money. And they have the cap space to do that as well.
it's like this would be a unique year because there is a plethora of choices
Yep.
and very high end in probably undervalued position, right? Monetarily, these guys aren't getting paid as much as, what they would have, got as far as
Yeah.
a percentage of the cap in the past. Now they're actually getting lowballed a lot, almost in a conspiracy sense. But uh, is there a running back you think would make a difference for us in this? Like what one or two running backs you feel like could make a difference in our offense?
So I like Josh Jacobs a lot. I've liked him since coming out of school. I think he is a true three down player. He's not, again, the most explosive. See, and this is kind of almost what I was alluding to earlier. Like, I have a type in terms of running backs, and I like guys who make sound decisions, who are good pass protectors, who can catch the ball a little bit. And Jacobs can, he has been able to since Alabama. And maybe they're lacking on the explosiveness. Like, I think the explosiveness is kind of eye candy that gets people excited about guys who aren't really as consistent as they need to be true runners. So I think Jacobs is a really impressive player. And then on the cheaper end, I really like what we saw out of Zach Moss in Indy this year. So those would kind of be my picks. I mean, I would be excited about a Saquon. I wouldn't be as thrilled about a Tony Pollard. I think he has kind of some of the similar questions about Ty Chandler that I have. Like, I don't think, like, in an expanded role for the Cowboys where he was asked to run inside and do a lot of the dirty work stuff, he looked a lot like Zeke Elliott, and people wanted Zeke Elliott out of town very badly for the Cowboys the year before, right? So he's really good at the explosive perimeter stuff, which I think Chandler is as well, but actually running between the tackles, I don't think he's as good of a player, and I want a guy who can be kind of a true three down back.
Now, when you speaking of three down backs, was Cam Akers that guy? Was he a three down back before he got hurt? Would we have benefited from him playing more before he got hurt?
I I I don't know. I was thinking he missed a number of reads as well.
Oh, he did.
And if you look at the raw numbers, like, he actually did not perform all that well. Like, he averaged like three something, 3.5 yards per attempt or something like that. His success rate wasn't very good. I do think he was building to something, and I thought the Atlanta game was a nice step up for him. So it definitely could have been, acclimation to the system, right? Because he got traded in the middle of the season. Obviously, he was familiar with Kevin O'Connell because O'Connell was with the Rams and a lot of the Vikings offensive staff was with the Rams, but it still takes time to get acclimated to that kind of situation. So he certainly could have been better. I guess my concern with him moving forward would be, look, he's torn that Achilles twice now, and I think it was in the same foot it was originally. So,
I think it's different one.
oh,
I
maybe it
think
was a different
yeah, I
foot, but
think it's the other one.
each time that happens, like, you're going to lose a certain amount of explosiveness and athleticism. So that's a major concern with me in terms of his recovery. He's a restricted free agent, which means the Vikings can just tender him
Tender and offer. Yeah.
and try to bring him back that way. But I don't know, like, the tender value is like $2 or $3 million. I don't know if he has that kind of value based off of that injury. So I think I would try to have him hit free agency and then kind of try to get a minimum deal or something like that done, because I think other teams are kind of going to be turned off by the injury as well.
And that's the kind of inside football we want to. I love to hear, and that does make sense. Is you can let him go and actually bring him back cheaper if he's just not finding a job, which happens a lot because the veteran minimum is more than bringing in a younger player. So if you want a really good, if you want really good player that you trust, I mean, but is coming off an injury. You don't want to pay him 3 million. You
Mhm.
wouldn't mind paying him the veteran minimum so he can get a prove it deal where he's only 25 this year, I think. So it's one of those situations like a Wanham who got hurt, or Cam Akers that got hurt, that we might, or Davenport, we might be able to bring him back for a cheaper deal. So that does make sense. So I'm glad you brought that up. Now the big hubbub this in at the combine, you talked about it, about the illegal legal tampering, hush hush stuff that happens. It seemed like every day or every hour something came up. Now Kwesi was quoted as saying in a press conference, "We have a quarterback. He's a leader and can win the ultimate prize." Later, and then the next day, interviewed by uh, Paul Allen, I believe, or it was one of them. He had an interview the next day and talked about these these deals tend to of this magnitude tend to get done at the deadline. So that all seems really positive. And then you got Kevin O'Connell, who said you talked glowingly about him on the podium, and then interviews with Paul Allen the next day and talks about, or no, Florio, sorry, I 100% want him back. I think we'll get the deal done. So those things were said, and then like yesterday at the combine, it was
Yeah.
like he deserves a chance to go check out his worth, you know, and now everybody's thinking he's gone. So what is it? Yeah, and you've tweeted about aggregators a little bit.
Yeah.
I've read. So what is it? Tell me what you think. You wrote a whole article about this stuff.
So the problem is the answer is we don't know and we can't know. Um, and unfortunately, that's just kind of the answer we have to accept here. It's a process that's going to play itself out. I believe that the Vikings want Kirk Cousins back, right? Like I think it's pretty plain to me from all the language that they've provided that they want to get Kirk Cousins back on a deal that they want to do, right? They don't want to overcommit, let's say, to Kirk Cousins, right? They don't want to give him more than 1 year guaranteed, is what the reporting is, right? So you'll have some accounts, and I think my aggregator thing was more relating to Justin Jefferson and the trade rumors or something like
Yeah,
that, which is
right.
just kind of ridiculous. But like, you know, they come out with the most inflammatory things that they want to say, right? Like Dov Kleiman or like JPA football or whatever. They are, I mean, they're like their accounts exist to try to make them money off of Twitter Blue or whatever. I don't know how that gets monetized, but like they want people to view their tweets as much as possible and react to their tweets as much as possible. That's been the entire model of their account the entire time. None of them have sources. They're literally just taking things from disparate articles, putting the at of the person in the tweet and then not linking you to whatever source that was, so you can't go and find it easily, right? And just use that tweet instead, so you'll retweet their stuff. So I have like extremely little respect for those guys. I don't think that they're just there to stir controversy, right? And get views on their tweets, in my opinion. But you know, you do have legit reporters reporting this stuff as well. And Florio, even though he likes to stir stuff up, especially I feel like in the Minnesota Vikings sphere, like he's a little bit vindictive about the Vikings, I think, because he's a Vikings fan. And like if they do things that he's not agreeing with immediately, then he kind of shoves it to him a little bit. But he also inputs a lot of opinion in his pieces, right? Like there are there's a clear motive kind of behind them. And there's a clear motive behind a lot of reports. Like anything you hear from Adam Schefter or Ian Rappaport or somebody, you know, the big accounts, that either comes from an agent or it comes from a team, right? And depending on the tone of that, you can tell whether or not it came from the agent or from the team, right? If it's pro
Right.
team, it came from the team. If it's pro agent, it came from the agent. Or if it's pro player, it came from the agent, right? Like all of these things people are saying have motives. And there's not really like you can discern nuggets of truth for them by seeing what the actual quotes are and what they're saying, right? So, like, the nugget of truth I believe is true for the Kirk Cousins is that they're not willing to guarantee past the first year, or they're trying not to guarantee past the first year. Now, what Kirk Cousins' camp has to do is try to go out and get guarantees beyond that first year, right? So, if he gets
Right.
those guarantees from another team and they're willing to offer that, then that's very much in play. It sounds like, you know, just based on everything that's going, Atlanta is very in on Kirk Cousins, right? And they want to bring Kirk Cousins there. But the question is Atlanta willing to guarantee Kirk Cousins, who's coming off of an Achilles injury, who's 36 years old, enough money to actually bring him there, right? I don't think the average per year is going to be a big thing or whatever. It's about the guarantee structure of the contract. And that's what, you know, Kwesi has said in his press conferences. Kirk has talked about how it's about the structure in his conversations. And then, you know, Kevin O'Connell is 100% in Kirk's corner, but he also plays with the caveat, because he is being a team player here, right? That it's going to have to work for both sides, right? It has to work for the player and for the team. And ultimately, you know, maybe Kirk already knows based off of the conversations what kind of deal he's going to be able to get. But we're not going to learn that until next week, right? Until he's actually able to officially announce it with these other teams.
Now, a lot of times you find them from a leader that they'll manage expectations. And one of the guys that I always saw in years past was Lou Holtz. He managed expectations. We're going to play Mississippi School for the Blind, and they got a really tough run defense. I mean, obvious they're gonna win by 4 touchdowns and win this game, but Lou Holtz would talk about how great that team was,
Yep.
even though he knew they were 0-5 at the time. So one of the things though with Quasey is is he really bad at managing expectations? We have a free agent quarterback. We have a quarterback, a leader, someone can win the ultimate prize. These deals will get done tend to get done at the deadline. I want him back. All those things are all I want him back. We're going to try to get him back. I expect the deal to get done at the deadline. Is that is not managing expectations of losing him at all. And it almost, if you're going to set those expectations that you want him back, you think he can win a Super Bowl, and then you don't get the guy you said you want back and can win a Super Bowl, it's almost like I will lean towards believing him because he is managing expectations of losing him very poorly. Where do you see that? I mean, do you see that as I see that, or
So
am I crazy?
I don't know exactly what you're quoting there.
I was on the podium and he
Okay,
said,
on at the combine podium, I didn't
yeah.
get nearly as strong of a wording of a phrasing from him, and I didn't listen to it word like I cannot call it back to you word for word, right? But with Kirk, it seemed to me like the way he was talking about him was, look, we believe Kirk's a very good quarterback. We know this, this, and this about him. We think if we are able to bring him back, he will be somebody who can do that. But the contract needs to get figured out, right? And both parties, i.e., the Vikings and Kirk Cousins, need to have their needs met in the contract. Like, I think that's something he uses a lot, right? Where like the player needs to have their needs met or something like that. I definitely recall him saying that.
Oh yeah, he
Um,
says that too, but he literally said we have a quarterback, he's a leader, he and can win the ultimate prize, quote unquote. So
I
it's
mean,
kind of
I think that's just saying if we're able to bring Kirk back and we want to bring him back under our parameters, right?
yeah.
Because if you listen to the continuing of the conversation, like he's not selling it as a guaranteed thing. The way he talked about Justin Jefferson in that press conference, I'm 100% willing to believe that Justin Jefferson is going to be a Viking for the long term, right? The way he talked about Kirk Cousins in in that press conference, to me, I came off as if it was up in the air. And it's just,
Well, one's a free agent, one's under
yeah.
contract.
But even with Jefferson, like him emphatically saying he's a blue chip player, right? Emphatically saying like you're trying to get blue chip players. I haven't thought about trade. I haven't even considered trading him, right? Like that's not a thought that's crossed my mind. Was more emphatic than the language he used around Kirk, but I can't recall the exact language around Kirk to be honest with you.
Oh yeah. Well, I mean, I think someone who can win the ultimate prize. I think he's talking about the Super Bowl. So
Oh yeah, I know.
I will say that's something kind of that's probably pretty good.
Yeah.
Compliment to a quarterback. Now, obviously, we may move on from Kirk, and we got some choices out there. And I asked you pre-show that if you had some, if you've watched some of the quarterbacks and had some viewpoints on them, is there a couple guys in that, like, do you have a top six and could you rank them, that kind of thing?
Yeah, so kind of the top 3 are the top 3 for me, and that's Caleb Williams, Drake May, and Jaden Daniels. Like, I have certain things I like about them and certain things I don't like about each of those players. So, like, Caleb Williams, um, I think obviously the off-schedule playmaking is phenomenal. There's a lack of play in structure in his game. Everybody kind of talks about it if you're talking about the negatives with Caleb Williams. The question that you need to figure out if you're a football team is the lack of in structure play because USC's offense was structured really poorly and they didn't have the guys to be able to do that, or because Caleb Williams is freelancing too much, right? Because there, especially in the pros, there has to be a balance between freelancing and making those incredible out of structure plays. For Drake May, it's kind of a similar question, honestly. Like he also, does a lot of things out structure, holds onto the ball a little bit longer. And I think there are a little bit more accuracy concerns that I would have with him. Not that he can't make the throws or be accurate, but in terms of a consistency with the accuracy, where he's doing everything right all the time, that's a little bit of a question to me. But like the physical talents for Drake May and Caleb Williams are off the charts. Like they're incredible throwers of the football. So I think that's a huge win for each of those. And if the Vikings get them, I'll be ecstatic. Jaden Daniels, I like a lot too. My biggest question with him, right? And I'm kind of talking about the negatives because these are the questions that need to be answered for me to be like all in on these guys, right? I think there's a lot that's great with him. Obviously, the athletic ability is phenomenal. I think he's a very strong passer as well and a good pocket player. Like a lot of times when quarterbacks have the running ability, they get cast as a running quarterback and maybe somebody who needs to work on their pocket footwork. But I never thought that was an issue with Lamar. And I don't think it's an issue with Jaden Daniels. Like I think he's a very good pocket player just based off of what I understand. The question for me becomes, and I'm comparing him to Lamar because I think, in terms of ability as a passer and as a runner, like there are pretty striking similarities there. And that's really, really high praise for me, right? The difference is as a runner, Jaden Daniels gets blown up all the time and Lamar never gets blown up. Like Lamar has an innate sense of what's going on around him and is able to protect his body from major hits, right? And Jaden Daniels, obviously, like if you just see the highlights of the big hits he's taken, does not have that. So that's going to get you hurt at the NFL level, and it's a major concern for me. The other guys, I just like the injury questions with Michael Penix and Bo Nix and the age put them below. So like I would have JJ McCarthy fourth. Bo Nix, it's like that Oregon offense is again, kind of a very collegey offense where it's hard to say exactly, how that's going to translate to the NFL level. Penix, I think, has the arm talent. I don't know if he has the mobility that I would want to be able to actually, create outside of structure. So that's a huge question to me. Plus the massive injury history, plus age. I think age is a major factor for quarterbacks. I want guys to be as young as possible coming out, and that's good for Caleb and Drake May and JJ McCarthy, and it's bad for Daniels and Penix and Nix. For JJ, I think he's got all of the traits that you want out of an NFL quarterback. People have talked about his deep accuracy and I guess accuracy throwing left. I haven't, watched him
Yeah,
fully.
I
So
got some people calling him JJ Ponder, and he can't throw left.
yeah. So
Which, if you go look at every throw, his misses were to the left side
yeah, no,
of the
it
combine.
is. That's definitely a question. There's probably a mechanics thing that could be fixed up there, but I think he's almost the cleanest in structure pocket player in this class. Like I think he's got really good footwork, and I think he's got a pretty good process in terms of how he throws the football.
One
So
of the things I noticed when I was looking at him, like you and me are like on the same page, and I had Luke Braun on here too, and he says basically the same thing you said about those top three. And I give JJ McCarthy the tiebreaker edge over the other two guys, Penix and Nix, because of the age. Nix just turned 24. McCarthy just turned 21, and I think Penix is 1 year old, close to 1 year older than these guys. He played 6 years, Nix 5. Now McCarthy, in the videos that I watched, it seemed like some of his balls he fluttered a little bit, and
mhm.
I wondered. It just came out his measurements, and he has 9-inch even hands, 9.0, 9-inch even hands. Is that a concern for you? Being how big a
Not
deal it was when they were talking about
yeah.
Pickett when he came out.
Yeah, not really for me, honestly. Like, if a guy has major fumbling issues in college, maybe that does become a concern, like just the ability to hold on to the ball there. But I honestly don't know enough about being an NFL quarterback to feel like I have this a strong gauge on how that actually impacts you. Like, I know it's a thing people talk about as an issue, but
Culpepper. I mean, they talked about it
yeah,
with Culpepper, and he
plenty
had
of
a little
guys have
bigger
had
hands. He had like
smaller
nine and a
hands
quarter.
and succeeded. Like, so I think at the end of the day, it'll it is what it is. I don't think it's not anywhere near the top of my list in terms of determining whether or not I want a guy at a quarterback.
You heard it here, folks. Matt Freese thinks McCarthy has baby hands and will not be successful at quarterback. Clip it.
Yeah,
No,
absolutely.
I'm kidding, man. I appreciate your input on that. Um, is there any now? Tell me where you feel. We got maybe 5 more minutes here. Do you have a feeling where we need to focus in the draft as far as there's free agency. How about this? Free agency and the draft. Where should we be focused on to maximize this roster?
Yeah, I mean, I think obviously the primary needs for the team are quarterback and edge rusher, right? Like, because we talked about edge rusher, we don't have any under contract, so we need to figure that out. We need to figure quarterback out. Even assuming we re-sign Kirk, my preference would be to draft a guy in the first round and have Kirk for a year, have that guy with the ability to sit for the year if we want that to happen.
I'm on
So
board, man.
I
I'm
want
on
to
board.
I want to attack quarterback hard because I think setting yourself up for the future at quarterback is critical. And if we bring Kirk back, we're likely not picking 11 in the future, right? Like this
Right.
team was better than that
This is an
last year.
opportunity right here.
So it's
Yep.
the best opportunity. Outside of that, I mean, I think we have to go almost all defense. Obviously, we need to figure out who's going to start at left guard, right? My preference would just be to bring Risner back. But outside of that, I feel like our offense is honestly relatively set, right? We've got awesome tight end in TJ Hawkinson. We talked about running back already. We need to address that, but that's a lesser priority position for me. The rest of the offensive line, we're bringing all the starters back except for one. And wide receiver, we've got Justin Jefferson and Jordan Addison. So how can you not feel good about that? We need some more depth there, but not too big for me. On the defensive side of the ball, though, we need starters everywhere, right? Like we need 2 pass rushers, like I mentioned. On top of that, we need 2 starting quality edge rushers, right? So that can be we get 2 edge rushers and then bring like a Jonathan Bullard back, or it can be we get an edge rusher who's like a star, like a Daniil Hunter back, a secondary edge rusher, and then a star interior pass rusher. That would kind of be my 2 plans there, depending on how the team wants to go. I do think we need another linebacker with some size. I like what we saw from Ivan Pace, but like I don't know if he is going to be a true every down player in a second season. So there's that.
Is
And
Hicks an option? Do you feel like he's a
I'd be fine with bringing him back, but I don't know if he is a quality starter. Like I think he's an acceptable starter. I don't know if he's a quality starter. So I'd like to see a little bit more from there if we can squeeze it in under the cap, but it kind of depends. But I would say this is a valid option. And then corner, I really want another starter beside Byron Murphy.
right?
I just don't think the other guys have shown enough. And maybe because they're all young and they're all under contract, one of Mekhi Blackman, Caleb Evans, Andrew Booth will put it together and become a really good starting corner. But I'd like to add more talent and competition there as well.
Let me ask you this because we're talking about cornerbacks
Yeah.
and we're about to probably say something about the safety because I'm going to bring it up. If we got defensive linemen like a Christian Wilkins, who's apparently
Yeah.
not going to get tagged by Miami, and putting him at D end and a 3-4, in getting an extra pass, getting a pass rush from there, who knows? Maybe um, Jaqueline Roy,
Yep.
on third downs plays nose tackle and get a pass rush because he showed that some
Yeah. He
flashes this
flashed a
year.
couple times last year for sure.
Yeah, right. So he flashes. So maybe guys like that step up. Won't that help the secondary? And because these guys are probably having to run with these guys for way too long a time, and they're getting picked apart.
Yeah, it helps. It absolutely helps when you don't have to sit back there for 5 seconds because nobody can
Yeah.
get home from the pass rush. I will say with the way the Vikings have run their defense, it puts a lot of stress on those guys in general because of how often we blitz, right? Fewer guys in coverage means the guys who are in coverage have to work harder. Also, I guess I would like the option to play man coverage, which we played virtually none of last year. And I think that came to haunt us towards the end of the year because in particular, like if with the zones, they were able to attack the same thing. Opponents were able to attack the same thing over and over and over again those last few games. And all zone coverages have weaknesses. Like there are ways to attack them. Man coverage, if you have lockdown man coverage, your guys are smothering the other guys one-on-one. So there's not really a good way to attack that if you are able to lock guys down. So
So
having that
we
in were
were
as
one
a
of the
change up helps.
we were number one in like blitzing, and we were number 1 in dropping 8.
Yes.
So it's like, and then like you said, is all zone, and you just no man. And I agree, man. We need to mix that up. Now, one of the things we're losing potentially is Harrison Smith,
Yep.
and I believe according to Over the Cap that if we post cut him June 1st, we're going to save 15 million. Pre June 1st, 11 something and some change. Uh, you know, is it time to move on from him? That's a big savings.
So in my projections, like I've done a couple salary cap things. I've cut Harrison Smith, or quote unquote, if you want to say Harrison Smith retires, he's 34, 35,
Right.
something like that. You
35,
know,
I think. Yeah.
both of those are valid options. I do think it's somewhat time. I think the Vikings are fortunate in that they have two quality starting safeties, right? In Cam Bynum and Josh Metellus besides him, both played really well last year. And you can make up for changing Josh Metellus's role by adding a slot corner rather than necessarily adding a safety, right?
Right.
So like there are ways to replace Harrison Smith outside of adding another safety and creating a safety need. Um, so the thing with post June 1st cuts is you do save the money, but you don't actually save the money until after June 1st. So it's like we would save 11 million immediately, and then the extra 4 million we would get after June 1st. So it doesn't really help you in terms of signing free agents. So I don't generally like doing that unless there's like a critical cap issue that you need to do that to save the money. Um, but yeah, so for Smith, like I hope he takes a pay cut. Excuse me. Honestly.
What would that look like?
Sorry about that. So last year I think we reduced his salary from something like 14 million to 6 million. I don't remember exactly what it was, but we did that last year.
Yeah.
So he might be willing to do the same again because I don't think he's going to get that value outside of the Vikings, right? And that's kind of the question. Is how much money can the player get paid once he leaves? And then that'll determine whether or not he actually wants to take a pay cut, right? So, like Eric Kendricks and Adam Thielen last year determined they were going to be able to get more money on the open market than the Vikings were offering him. And I think they both did. Like Kendricks got like 6 million a year and Thielen got like 9 million a year or something like that, right? It was a pretty good deal for him.
Okay. Hey, in case you're just entering, he is not getting choked up over possibly losing Harrison Smith.
No, I'm just getting choked up over, I don't know, something in my throat.
Oh man. Okay. Oh, hey man, it was a pleasure having you on. I would love to talk more, especially in the year when you're breaking down film, because I really actually enjoyed that on Twitter. And you know what? You proved me wrong completely. I don't know if you realize it's like in Ty Chandler, I'm like, man, he did fine. He did fine. And then I watched the last 2 or 3 games of the year and he didn't do so fine pass blocking. And you were completely right. And my apologies. You're completely right.
Hey
But
man,
hey,
it's all good. I think the thing is like that Bengals game was awesome. He had a great game in the Bengals game. And if he can put that together consistently, like he'll be a good back. But the thing is he wasn't able to put it together consistently. But,
I'm all for with him a rotation. I want a big home run hitter, and I think we got one in him, potentially. But I'm all for like you, bucking the trend of you know low percentage cap hits on running back that wins Super Bowls. I'm like, dude, like I want to fix our running problem right now, and let's put a guy in there that can wreak havoc and cause defenses problems,
yeah.
even if the run blocking's not there, and there's a lot of guys out there. But hey, before we go, can you say again where we can find you?
Yeah, absolutely. You can find me at Fries Football on Twitter. You can find the podcast I'm a part of with Nick Olson and Greg Blake at Kindred Skulls on Twitter. Find it on YouTube by searching Kindred Skulls. And I write for Zone Coverage every week, so zonecoverage.com.
And Skull Vikes.